and it is about 2,400 years old. So all of the blobs that you can see there are amphora, and each of these amphora are probably 3 feet long. Our estimate, based on the volumetric calculations we've done, is there's 3,500 of them on the site. As a slight aside, we did 6 dives on this site. We're the only people ever to have dived it because the Italian government had been doing side scanning. They'd found it, they'd looked at the depth and gone, we'll just add that to the archive, we're never going back. So there was a bit of side scan data, and that was it. And then we turned up and said to the Sicilians, hey guys, we're going to be in town, we're going to be doing some project work. On the first year we were there, we had a 50 metre, so it was like 150 foot long project ship that someone had loaned us. Quite how that arrangement happened, I have no idea. If I can ever work out how to do it again, that would be awesome. 150 foot ship, 2 submarines, recompression chamber on board, a 5-star chef. So literally we'd get out of the water, out of the dry suits, into the cabin, and there would be a full 3-course meal with wine and everything laid out, ready for us.
Every once in a while, God smiles.
As I said, that's the one and only time that's ever happened to me on a dive project. Yeah. Normally, certainly in the UK, you get out of the water, you get sworn at by the skipper, and if you're lucky, you get handed a mug of coffee or tea, and that's it. So yeah, the chef and the rest of it was kind of a good deal. But yeah, so we turned up and said, hey guys, what have you got that's interesting? We're here, we have this capability. And they were kind of like, well, I don't really know, because the Sicilian archaeologists, they'll dive to about 40 to 45 metres, so that's 130 to 150 feet. And then that's their limit, that's as far as they'll go. Obviously this being over 400 feet was out to the range. And they went, well, you're probably not going to be interested, but we've got this. And we looked at the side scan and went, well, that's a wreck. It's like, yes. Where is it? That way. And when it was, how it sank, I have no idea. It's like a 1.5 miles offshore on a completely flat bottom. So what caused it to sink, I don't know. But we went out, we looked at it and it's like, okay, well, that's within the range. We can go and park the ship on top of it. We'll drop the submarines down. I think the thing that really got us the permit, and we still have the permit for diving all of these wrecks, we're now basically the only people with a continuous permit. Most people have to get annually, they have to apply for a scientific permit. We have I think a 10-year permit for the whole of Sicily. Was because we took the head archaeologist, put him in the submarine, and took him to the site. So at that point, he's down there, sat in his shorts and t-shirts, drinking a cup of coffee, as then the divers descended onto the site. So he could then actually direct the operations from the safety of the submarine, whilst the divers were actually being the hands-on people on the wreck.
At 405
At 405 feet. There's something particularly odd about the submarine goes down first. We get a radio call up from the sub. Yep, we're on site. We drop down following our shot line, and there is a submarine with 500,000 lumens of lights on the front of it lighting up the wreck. And we swim in, and we've got 20 minutes of bottom time to try and get everything done. At which point it's like, right, time to go. We start coming up, 6 hours of decompression on the way up, and then halfway through that, the submarine just goes past, and you can see them go up. It's like, yep, sods. Okay, and then they come back down again, and you can see they've only gone up to refill the coffee. And they're heading back down again. It's just like, it's a good Italian signal. Anyway, so this is a distraction. But honestly, if you look at this, if you did a traditional survey on this wreck, using tape measures and measuring and trying to do the sketch, and I think, I can't remember what's his name.
Alex?
No, not Alex.
Tom?
You're
Rob?
talking later, after me.
Guy.
Guy, thank you. Sorry, my brain is terrible with names at the best of times. As Guy was saying, sketching on the top of a screen of the digital stuff. Well, you couldn't do a traditional sketch of this. Measuring like that takes 10, 15 minutes per measurement to do. And that's before you're in a 150-pound rebreather and 5 extra cylinders for bailout gas. We're not manoeuvrable at this depth. So trying to sketch this would be impossible. It would never happen. The model that you can see here is only 25 minutes of dive time to make the model. About 3 weeks of processing, but 25 minutes of dive time. So then that gives us the ability to give them this scaled model that they can measure from without having to do all the measurements. So let's now, where are we, that way? Photogrammetry. Originally, I love this, that the first description of what we now call photogrammetry was described by Leonardo da Vinci in 1480. That was 400 years before someone invented a camera. So I love the fact that the concept has been around for even longer than the practical elements that we need to make it happen. More modern, it's about these 3D digital models that we're making. It involves lots of software, lots of processing, and all of the development for this stuff has come from aerial photography. So nowadays, aerial photography is massive again. In World War II, it was a big thing. You'd fly an aircraft at high altitude over the enemy factories, taking lots of photos, and then you'd do photogrammetry on it. At the time, photogrammetry meant a dude with a stereo headset and twiddly knobs trying to line things up to try and work out how big the factory was, so you knew whether you had to drop 500 or 1,000 bombs on the factory to blow up the factory. The last probably 5 years had been a big renaissance in photogrammetry because of drones. Little, tiny little drones. You can buy them like $1,000. You can pre-program it on your iPad. You can send it up. It will take 500 photos without you having to do anything. It'll land itself, and then you just take the card out, put it into the software, and boom, happy days. So the software has come on a long way in the last 5 years because of that new influx of technology with drones. Drones have something that we don't as divers. Drones have GPS. And we are trying to work out a sensible way of doing... I say sensible way. There are ways of doing positioning at that depth, but they tend to... The price tag tends to have at least 6 digits in it and go up from there. We're actually working with a company who have a 5-digit solution at the moment. But, so yeah, here we go. Leonardo with a lute here, looking at how shapes change as you look at them from different angles. Bunch of history. I love this because nowadays, you see people on social media, and what do? They take photos of their dinner, their cats, and then selfies. And I look at this. We've got Nadir, the guy who invented the hot air balloon, basically, taking an aerial photograph in his hot air balloon. We have Wilbur Wright taking the first aerial photograph from an aeroplane. It's like, invent the thing, selfie. It's definitely what's going on there. 1924, German guy, also von Gruber. I love this. Derived the projective equations that are fundamental to analytical photogrammetry. I did not at all copy that straight from Wikipedia. What he basically did is, he said, well, rather than trying to do this by eye, so the early days, they would project, when they were developing the photographs, they would project them at an angle to try and re-square the image. So you take the photo at an angle, you project it from the opposite angle, and then what you get developed would come out correctly 90 degrees on corners. So what von Gruber said is, well, if we know the characteristics of the lens, the altitude that the photo is taken from, and then we can measure items on the photo and use a calculation to tell us how long it should be in reality. So that's kind of clever. Back then, obviously, all done by hand. And in World War II, those equations were key to everything, and it was all done by hand. 1957, Hobra demonstrated the first digital photogrammetry. Again, you needed something that could do digital before you could do photogrammetry on it. So that's as computing power through the 1950s kind of came into play in universities and government facilities, they digitized that process. And from 1957 till now, it's just got better and better because computers have got better and better. So why is this useful? It's mostly useful, for me at least. I'm a diver. I'm not an archaeologist. I like to call myself an archaeological diver. I'm not a diving archaeologist. My background is engineering and computer software, but I came into it because I love diving, and shipwrecks are awesome. I like shipwrecks. But I've also been absolutely petrified when I've taken archaeologists diving, especially when we start talking into the hundreds of feet depth range. Because in my experience, archaeologists don't make good divers, in the same way that divers don't make very good archaeologists. So you need a symbiosis of the two. And trying to take an archaeologist to 400 feet and safely bring them back requires a team of 4 mostly with cattle prods. It's like, do it, no. Because they are concentrating on what they have in their head as important, which is the thing that they're looking for, the measurement that they're taking. Having experienced technical divers doing the diving, we all have been doing it long enough that gas consumption, decompression management, all of these kind of things, environmental management and looking at how the environment is changing currents and temperature, that's in the forefront of our brain. And then kind of the second thing is the task. Now we're still going to do the task, and we're going to do it well, but that level of safety is on top because it's been hammered into us for a long time. The archaeologists tend to have been an archaeologist for a very long time, so that's what's hammered in. And then they took up diving just because they happened to be looking at something underwater. So they will have put the minimum amount of effort necessary to become a good diver before trying to do the stuff. And this is where this is really useful, because we can train divers very easily. I'm going to go with very easily. Make it fair. To capture the data that's needed. And then we can lock the archaeologists in their nice safe office, ideally with padded walls and no outside distractions, maybe whale song, and give them the data for them to measure to their heart's content. And again, a little aside here, the Mars project that I'm going to be talking about in a bit, we have the same team of the same archaeological team since the wreck was found. So they know us quite well by now. We've done something like 500 man dives, 500 dive sessions on the Mars. No, maybe that's a bit high. Maybe 250 man dive sessions on the Mars. And they still don't understand that if they ask us to measure something, we're not going to go down with a tape measure. Because we have a scale-accurate digital model of the thing down to 1 millimetre accuracy. So if they want to know the length of a cannon, it's 2 mouse clicks. But their brains are so attached to traditional archaeology and sketches that they go, well, we want to confirm that that cannon is 3.65 metres long. It's like, click, click, 3.65 metres. But how do you know it's 3.65 metres long? Because we've measured 47 sets of pairs around that of scaled onto it when we made the model, and it now is accurate. So anyway, so archaeological sites, recreation and digital, means that we can do all that measuring without needing to send a dive team in each time to do it. For biological stuff, it can be used to track growth. So there's a university in Australia who are tracking, it's about 20 feet by 20 feet of coral reef, and they're making a new model once a month. So every month, and they've been doing it about 5 years now. So every month they go in and they make another model. And then they can basically look in 3D how that coral is growing or shrinking and what's happening with it. Which to me, again, is a really cool concept, because it's like the ultimate time-lapse videos. It's rather than just being from one side of maybe a day or two, it's a 5-year time-lapse that you can rotate, you can look into, you can measure. It really allows us to let the general public kind of understand a bit more what a shipwreck site will look like. I've got a 4-year-old kid, and I've tried showing him diving photos, and he goes, "Is that you, Daddy?" It's like, "No, I took the photo." I show him the next one. "Is that you, Daddy?" "No, I still took the photo." That's all he cares about. I've tried showing him video. It'll last about 10 seconds before he's bored and wants to watch Paw Patrol or something. I gave him a tablet with a model on it, and 30 minutes later I had to extract the tablet from him because he's like, "Oh." So kids love this stuff because it's interactive. And for me, this is one of the things I've been doing quite a lot. I take this talk to dive shows and things where hopefully there will be kids involved. We have the VR system now as well, where you can experience diving in VR. And the last one I did was about 3 weeks ago, and for the whole of 2 days we had like 15 kids lined up just to use the VR system. So it gets people involved. It gets youngsters interested in what we do, which is something that's really important, because none of us are getting any younger, and if we want any of this stuff to carry on, we need to try and encourage the next generations to get involved. And frankly, the whole reason I got into it is because I saw a 3D model and I thought, that looks really cool. Honestly, I then tried it with a smartphone camera and the software at the time in probably about 2012, and went, nah, that didn't work, and I ignored it for several years. I wish I'd stuck with it at that point, but it's all good. So here's again, this is not a video. This is the render from the output of the photogrammetry. Again, this is actually off Sicily. This is the base of a sacrificial altar. There would have been a big bowl sat on the top. There have only ever been 2 of these found on wreck sites. We found the first one in 2014 on the wreck I showed you at the beginning, and then we found this one a year later. This one is a little bit deeper. This is like 420, and it's just on the edge of like a drop off. So both sides here drops off, and there's a reef up the side here. The wreck it came off is actually about 200 feet shallower up the reef. So we've got some deck planks and stuff, and some of the amphora there, and then this thing has rolled down the hill and stopped there. Sank in about 300 BC, and in about, I'll get this right, about 400 AD, a local volcano erupted and a new island appeared 6 miles away from this thing. So this thing was there long enough that a new island appeared, and it sat literally precariously. It's like 3 feet this way, it would be 900 meters deep, and 3 feet that way, it'd be 900 meters deep, and it was just sat there. So what we did was in this particular case, the archaeologists told us we would like that because it's quite rare. So we first started by scanning the whole area, and you can see all of the growth and stuff that's actually on this pillar. This is all from the scan that we did underwater. So we scanned it first, and then came back the next day and recovered it to the surface. And again, you can see there's a scale ruler on there, and what you can't see is there's actually a little arrow on the floor over this side to give a north direction. So what can we do? Well, we can do all sorts of things. I've seen a couple of orthomosaic photos in some of the presentations. Again, with photogrammetry, this is kind of easier because an orthomosaic photo, I don't know if anyone here has tried to do it, you have to be exactly the same depth off the floor at exactly the same angle. Alex yesterday was talking about using a tripod, like a pyramid tripod, to keep it. So taking the photos takes a lot of time, and it's quite hard. With photogrammetry, I need to take more photos, excuse me, but I don't actually care what angle I'm taking them from. I have to get overlap between them, but I take lots and lots of photos, and then I can click it. Once I have a model, I just click a button and say, which direction would you like your orthomosaic photo taken from? And it just does it in software. The digital reconstructions, we can 3D print stuff. And we're actually, again, I'm talking Mars in a minute, but we're actually 3D printing the entire Mars wreck. So eventually it'll be about 6-7 feet long for the museum. So we're going to it's being printed in about 150 parts, but that's going to be a good jigsaw to try and put back together. But the whole wreck will get printed and then painted for the museum. Scale prints, again, we can actually print out the stuff and give scale bars so people can measure from it. And VR rectors. When I wrote this slide pack, it's a little while ago now, we didn't have one. We didn't have a VR rector. It was just something we thought, wouldn't that be cool? We now do, thanks to link up with Facebook, actually. So Facebook have helped with funding the development of a VR tour of the Mars. So here's an orthomosaic photo. This is a wreck in Malta. It is a German fast torpedo boat, the S-31, sank in World War II. She hit a mine. Anyone guess where the mine hit? These things are basically made of wood. Made of wood, and it's got the 2 torpedo tubes at the front. That little pack there, you can see, is 20mm anti-aircraft ammo that was sat in a pack on the top. Unfortunately, Facebook won't let me pull in the high-resolution version of this because you can actually zoom in 3 more times and you can see the patina on the top of the bullets from the model.
Why do they care? Why? Why would they limit you in that way?
Facebook can't take that. Not Facebook. Sorry, not Facebook. Photoshop. PowerPoint. PowerPoint. Sorry. Too many things.
It's a resolution thing.
Resolution.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
The original image file is 1.8 gigabytes.
That's
as
why.
an image file.
Got it.
It's we get this right. It's something like 85,000 pixels one way and 45,000 pixels the other way. So gigapixel is no longer, yeah, the passe is. I've seen some photogrammetry that they did of a town in China where you can zoom in onto the watches of the people in the shop. That was impressive. We haven't quite got to that detail yet because, well, we're underwater.
Yeah.
So how do we do it? So first up, let's see, who here takes any kind of underwater photos? No. How many photos on average would you expect to take on a dive? 50, 100, something like that. Then you look at them and one of them's okay and you throw the rest of them away. Yeah, me too, when I'm taking photos too. And I've worked with some really, really good photographers who will spend 10 minutes getting the perfect shot.
They're not fun to dive with.
Not as the model when you're... It's like, can I scratch yet? And then you think, oh, he's definitely doing something, now's the time to scratch. Oh, flash. I don't care for photogrammetry what each shot is, because I'm aiming for at least 1 per second of dive time. So literally I'm covering as much ground as I can. I have an intervalometer built into my camera and it is set to 0.7 of a second. So once I trigger, every 0.7 of a second it's taking a photo. And I'm just moving, click, 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 along the wreck. I get to the end and I turn around and I start moving back again. This is not exciting diving. It's even worse for my buddy, whose job is to not get in the way. It's probably easier being a buddy for a photogrammetographer, rather than a photographer, because buddies for photographers tend to have to look pretty. I don't care what my buddies look like as long as it's not between me and the thing I'm taking photos of. Because I'm looking for a minimum of 80% overlap between one photo and the next. For large areas, this lends itself to stuff like ROVs. ROVs would make would be good if anyone out there made a sensibly priced ROV with high enough resolution cameras in them. Unfortunately, there seems to be a gap. You can get up to about $15,000 for an ROV, and none of them are particularly great, especially not if you want to do this. And then you start adding zeros. And there's a nice one that we're looking at the moment. It's only $350,000. And by looking at it, I mean like the kids looking in the toy shop. Yeah, that would be nice. But and then if anyone wants to try and sponsor us, then happily take checks. But we're also trying to get different angles. So it's not like photo mosaicing where you've got to take them all perfectly parallel. We're trying to get different angles because every time we get a bit of different angle into the equation, we're getting more 3D data that we can use. So we want to aim for maximum coverage, cover everything. But because it's really important to have sharp images, it means we need relatively fast shutter speeds, we need to have a relatively small aperture, and so we just have to throw lots and lots of light at it. The better the visibility, the easier this is, but the Mars, which I'll show you, the average visibility on Mars was less than 6 feet, so it's still possible even in poor visibility. Obviously there must be some visibility. You wouldn't be able to do this in probably less than 3 feet of vis. Although again, there are some commercial camera systems out there that are now, I think they're in black and white, but can actually look through a certain amount of stuff in the water. And we haven't yet managed to persuade them to lend us one to try, so I don't know if it would work. A little bit of light. So this was me in Sardinia doing some mapping of the formations in a cave. At this point, I have 70,000 lumens of light on the camera, and my buddy, who's out of shot up here, has another 70,000 lumens of video light pointing down, trying to light this up. And that was just about okay. We keep switching between strobes and video lights to try and work out what's best, but basically the more light we can throw at it, the better the results we get. So how do we take the images? A couple of options. Number one is what we call mowing the lawn. So kind of ziggling backwards and forwards, a bit like a traditional search pattern. The important thing though is to make sure that on the corners, we still cover the corners. Now the problem with mowing the lawn is it's very easy to get a little bit lost. Especially if you're on a fairly scattered wreck site that doesn't have nice parallel sides. If you're on a modern wreck, You just use the structure of the wreck to help you navigate. On this, which is a big pile of amphora, I'm actually quite impressed that I didn't have more gaps with scanning. Or what we call spiraling, so you kind of go round and round an object. In reality, it's actually a mixture of both. We end up using kind of a bit of both for the different artifacts. And the nice thing is we can also go back, as long as the wreck hasn't changed, we can go back and add more data to it on another dive. So in this case, this is that wreck from the beginning. It's 405 feet deep. 23 minutes of dive time got me that. Had I had a chance to do another dive, I would have then probably tried to go the other way, and then I would have got better coverage in some of the bits in the middle. Then what does it do? Well, the software is basically looking for high contrast points. So in this case, this is a wreck up in Seattle, and we took a couple of pictures that weren't next to each other. These aren't two photos that would be next to each other. We've intentionally taken them apart. The blue lines are points that it has decided are definitely the same. Red lines are ones it can't think of. So what it's doing is the software is scanning the photo, going into the photo, looking at every single pixel inside the photo, and then all the pixels that sit around that pixel, and it's going, are you high contrast or not? And if it is, it puts it to one side and allocates it a number. And it does that to every photo. And then it looks at photo number 1 and the points that it's found, and photo number 2 and the points that it's found, and it goes, could you be the same as that point? Yes, no. And allocates them as pairs. And it starts building up this mesh of pairs of points that might be the same between photo 1 and photo 2. Then it does it between photo 1 and photo 3, and then photo 1 and photo 4, and so on and so on. And then when it finishes, it starts again at number 2. It goes between 2 and 3, and then 3 and 4, 2 and 4, and so on. Now, luckily, it's not a complex calculation, but it has to do it billions of times, because there's potentially 40,000 of these points in each photo. And if you've got 1,000 photos, that's an awful lot of points it has to do multiple comparisons to. And once it's got something it thinks might be a point, it then goes, well, I think you're a point in photo 1 and 2. And now, are you the same point in photo 3 and 1 and 3 and 2? And if it is, it starts locking them together. And from this, it does some magic. As in, I have a bit of a background in software engineering. I don't know how this works. I think there's just a pixie inside the computer that's doing this for me. It then works out where you were when you took the photo. So from all of this, it can then go, I think the photo was taken from here. And by doing it, it builds this what we call a sparse cloud of the thing you're looking at. So something like that. Now in itself, I actually think these are really pretty. I really like the look of these. This is just the end result of the first step. And once it's done that, it knows where the camera was. So it knows how I'm spiraling around it. And then basically we run the same process again. Except this time, because it knows where the photos were taken, it can fill in a lot more detail and add a load more points. And suddenly we get this. I've taken the colour away from this one just to give it a bit more contrast for the next image. So what you can see here is anywhere that's black is areas that didn't get scanned. Now in this case, I scanned this with a GoPro in 40 minutes. So one dive, 40 minutes with a GoPro. So this is only 100 feet deep though. So the next picture you'll see why it's so good, because it's in the Mediterranean, very shallow. Lots of light means, oh no, not this one, in a minute. It becomes blue. But the next thing we do is we take all of the dots and we draw little triangles and solidify it. So what we've now got is something we can't look through. And again, you can see where the holes are. And they're areas that are hidden by structure. And I could very easily go back and then fill that in on another dive and spend a bit more time in those difficult areas. And then the last bit, which is the bit that really makes it pop out, is we then take bits of the photo. Again, this is not manual, this is click the button, the pixie does the work. Every single triangle that it has made, every surface, it looks at the photos and says, what's the best photo of that piece? Cuts it out and sticks it onto the triangle. So we gain a whole load of realism that we didn't have before. So as I said, this is very blue because it's basically mostly natural light. But you can see the rivets on the top of the cabin. If you zoom in, you can actually see how the rust is working on the metal. You can see that patina.
What kind of computing environment is this rendering or calculating?
It will work on basically anything. That the software that we use runs on PC, Mac, or Linux. It's heavily optimized to use graphics processing. So,
Gotcha.
and gets very hot, really, really hot. So then we can, as I said, we can take it and do the stuff that we mentioned before. And I'll show you some of. So here, for anyone who cave dives, they might recognise where this is, but
whoa,
this is a little bit of Ginny Springs coming out of Ginny Springs. Again, this was about 6 minutes of dive time to capture this. Yeah.
How many pixels is that? And that's incredible.
How many pixels?
it's all of them.
About in this model, there's probably about 1.5 million pixels.
That's not bad.
Yeah. If I processed it to the next step, it would probably be 200 to 250 million pixels, which starts getting.
How deep is that?
That's the deepest bit on that particular one's about 85 feet.
Where is that?
High Spring, just in High Springs, just north of. North
Devil's Ear to the Devil's
yes.
Eye?
Well, this is from a place they called the Park Bench to the Devil's Ear.
Which is where is
Ginny Springs in High
That's
Springs.
going out from the Santa Fe into the.
Going the other way, going towards the exit. Yeah.
So we want to go do this on wreck sites out here and stuff like that. Basically, the equipment we need, what's on that list, and cost wise.
So one of the big advantages you guys have out here is it's pretty shallow. So you need a camera, and as I said, you can do it with a GoPro or something similar. The better the camera, the sharper the result you will get. So GoPro video is not amazing. It will give you a result, but if you want truly sharp, you kind of need an SLR or something similar. You need decent lights, and actually one of the things that I found is when I'm in very shallow water, the natural daylight affects things too much. There's too many ripples, so sometimes we shoot at night to avoid that. And then processing, I mean, we use gaming PCs to process on.
Let's say that somebody here took their own video, could they submit it to you for processing without having to invest in?
Possibly, it depends how well the video is shot. To put it in perspective, I teach a class on this stuff for GUE, and it's a 4-day program to basically introduce people on how to take those images. It's not quite as easy as I make it sound, if that makes sense. That the quality of the images that you take is very much directly proportional to the quality of the output, but if you take the images from the wrong place, there is no output.
What about residue in the water? Like we've got zero visibility of the shots.
Zero viz, you won't get anything. It's because this is an optical system. You know, you can't see, it can't process.
Well, just to be clear, that what you showed there on the Denny Spring,
Yeah.
that was taken with the GoPro, or that was
That one,
with the
that one was taken with the camera on interval mode, but
So it was just taking a bunch of pictures one at a time.
yeah, but I've done similar with GoPro in other caves.
What kind of camera were you using for that?
For the Ginny Springs one, I think that was a Canon 500D. I'm now using a 77D, so like a consumer level SLR in housing. Mostly the problem that I have is that because a lot of the stuff that we do is super deep, we're limited to what we can actually take deep. So we tend to end up at the higher end of the price range for the gear.
Did you find anything down there?
With Ginny? Divers? So the Sicily wreck, the one that I showed right at the beginning, that was where we found the first of these sacrificial altars. It's actually the only intact one that's ever been found. So, or rather, the only intact one ever found on a underwater site. They found a few more on terrestrial sites, but yeah, we basically found the only 2 in existence, and the bowl, the first one where we actually have the bowl for the top, is there's I think there's only like one other bowl anywhere in existence in the world. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, that's what happens when you can dive somewhere that nobody has ever been before, because it's 400 plus feet deep.
Do you know that site in Japan where they say all kinds of square angles that look like some kind of monument?
There's all sorts of these things around the world. There's one in Sweden that looks just like the
UFO.
Yeah, the UFO site. And yeah, it's just an odd natural formation. I mean, at the end of the day, the people who found it put out all of this nonsense about the GPS not working and the magnetometer not working and that we can't take any photos. No, they just don't understand how to to use a camera. Is the problem. And I didn't want to let anyone know exactly where it was, because then someone else would take a camera and take a photo and go, no, it's just a depression in the seabed.
So that have you dove there, or have you?
I've not done Japan, and I've not done the UFO site in Sweden either. But yeah, it's a lot of this stuff looks really odd because the side scan or that they put out is from a certain angle, and it makes it look really odd. We have a bit of side scan from Mars, which I'll now talk about, that looks just like a U-boat. And so we then side scanned it from another direction, and it was basically two rocks and basically like a telegraph pole that floated out. So when the side scan goes from one side, you go, it's a U-boat.
So
Yeah.
if you scan the
Been
face
there.
on Mars, you'd probably see a couple rocks and a loose association. There won't be no.
Yeah. That's it. We have scans around Mars out to 2.5 miles out from the site because we're actually missing a big piece of it. So I'll talk about that now. Anyway, right. Mars the Magnificent. Let's start with a little bit of geography. So this is Northern Europe in the middle 16th century. This is what's modern day Sweden. This is modern day Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Germany down here. At this point in time, Sweden as a country had only existed about 20 years. That King Vasa, Gustav Vasa, is the guy who kind of created Sweden or tried to create Sweden as a state of it in its own right. And up until this point, it had basically been the Norwegians and the Denmarks, the Danish, who were kind of controlling that territory. And Vasa was a very aggressive king, so he kind of started pushing out. They started building castles all the way around, trying to really make this this country work. And when Gustav Vasa died, his son, Eric. So this is King Eric the 14th of Sweden. Now remember, Sweden only was formed 20 years before Mars sank. So how could he be the 14th King Eric? He wasn't. He just thought that adding, you look at the kings and queens in England, and they all were like, Henry VIII. And, well, Eric decided that he needed some background, and so to promote his take to the throne, he called himself Eric the 14th.
Social media. Kind of
Absolutely,
promotion.
back in the day. And so here he is, kind of the whole, Scandinavian, blue-eyed, weird beard. Nothing's changed. I don't know if anyone ever goes to Scandinavia, they have all these weird beards. Reigned from 1533 to 1577. Lived from 1533 to 1577. Reigned from 1560 to 68. And he was very Machiavellian. He took what his father had started and went, that wasn't good enough. We are not going to just try and protect the land that we've seized. We are going to push on. And the reason is, I'm going to jump back a couple of slides here. It all comes down to this bit of waterway here, the Straits of Denmark. Because what you've got over here is the Baltic Sea. So this is all the Baltic Sea. Out here is everywhere else. So the country that controls the Straits of Denmark control all shipping into and out of the Baltic Sea. And Sweden, even modern day Sweden, starts here and kind of comes around this way. So it doesn't have any of this access to the North Sea that the Norwegians had. So you've got Denmark down here, and they're in cahoots with Lübeck, which is a German city-state down here. So they have a combined army, and they are pushing. They've got a land army pushing north through Sweden, trying to take over Eric the 14th, because they're saying, well, he's just a pretender, upstart pretender. We're going to get rid of him. Eric the 14th, I like this. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. And nothing was ever great achieved without danger. So, I think we all know that one. So he kicked off this war, basically, with Denmark. He went, no, enough's enough. And so, land battles. And the thing is that the Swedish managed to have some pretty good castles built. And so they were kind of in siege with the Danish land army that was coming north. And the plan was it was getting to that point in the equation about a year into the war, and they decided that what they needed to do was send an armada south down the Baltic to northern Germany and try and recruit a mercenary army. So all of these German city-states basically had armies for sale, for rent. And so the idea was sail south, find an appropriate city, rent the army, and then whilst the Danish are trying to push up north into Sweden, we'll sneak up behind them and kick them in the arse. That sounds like a good plan to me. And so that was what they did. They decided they were going to build this fleet. They kind of scuttled around and looked around and got every ship that they possibly could that could have a few cannon strapped to it, and started this navy. And Eric's kind of looking at what he's got, and he goes, "No, that's not good enough. We need something new." And he commissioned a warship to be built, and that warship was Mars. And so when Mars was built, she was the largest warship on the planet at that time. She was the first ship built with standing orders to sink the enemy. Up until the 1560s, when this war was going on, the standard for naval battles was Fleet 1 go this way, Fleet 2 go this way, you fire your cannons into each other's rigging, hopefully you disable each other, crash into them, send your marines across, and capture the ship. And ships sank by accident. They didn't like other ships to sink because then you couldn't get the gold or the precious stuff off, and the ship itself was worth something. So this is why when you look at historical records, quite a lot of times you see ships that started off British, then became Spanish, then became British again, then became French. And, it's kind of all this swapping backwards and forwards. Is because when that ship got captured, it got towed back into port, refitted as in your own colours, and then sent back out to fight again. But Eric went, "No, screw that. I don't care about their fleet. I want their fleet on the bottom of the Baltic. I want to absolutely decimate their fleet." So Mars was designed. I think I've got some. Is this going to play?
Eric the 14th had a new idea about how to fight at sea. Up to this time, battles were mainly fought through boarding and fighting on deck. From now on, he decided to let the guns do the job from a distance. He ordered his new ship to have more cannons on board than any other ship before. Eric's vision that large, stable ships could carry more artillery would change the rules of engagement at sea.
The war for which Mars was built and in which it sank was the first in history to be decided by gunnery. And so in that sense, it's breaking very new ground. This recurring idea of the great ship that embodies the king's prestige, that embodies the power of the nation, at the same time that it tries to concentrate as much firepower into one platform. That's really what a whole chain of events that Mars set off in the 1560s.
King Eric the 14th is obsessed with the idea of creating an empire. The key to realizing his ambition is the largest fleet in the world, with Mars as the admiral's flagship. With 5 decks, 2 just for gunnery, she is the crowning glory of Eric's fleet. In May 1564, a combined fleet from Lubeck and Denmark sails toward this Eric the 14th.
Pass on a little one. Then a whole hour-long documentary that Smithsonian Channel and National Geographic have got involved with for this. So we've got Mars, this ship that was built, and she was built bigger than anything else. Alex yesterday was talking about bronze cannons and always wanting a bronze cannon. Mars had 122 cannon on board. 8 of them were iron. So what's that? 114 bronze cannons. The biggest one is, it's that at the back. It's this around, and it's 5.2 meters long. So that's 17 feet long. And she had 12 of those on the lowest end. It's like 6 each side. And then all the way up to cannonettes and stuff in the rigging. She had 4 mini cannons in the crow's nest. She was bristling for battle. So let's look at the pre-game scorecard, as it were. We've got Jakob Bagge, the Swedish admiral, and he has 37 ships and 5,000 soldiers in addition to the sailors who sail the ships on the fleet. We've got Trolle in Denmark with his 23 ships, and Nebel from Lubeck with his 10 ships. So we've got 33 ships versus 37 ships. And that's not bad odds for a naval battle. You know, I wouldn't like to say which way that would go just based on the numbers, until you realise that Mars has almost as many cannon as the entire Lubeck fleet put together. And to put it in perspective, so the little video clip, you saw the ship in the background of those ships, that's the Vasa. The Vasa was built about 40 years after Mars, and they tried to kind of go, you know, Vasa was named after Gustav Vasa, the first kind of proper king of Sweden. They tried to go for the same kind of concept as Mars. Let's make a ship with lots of cannons. And they sailed Vasa out of the dockyard on its basically maiden voyage with all the gun ports open and all the cannons out to show the world, you know, look at this amazing great big ship. It was covered in gold leaf and stuff. Turned left into the wind, the lower deck went underwater, flooded the lower decks, he turned over and sank. The Vasa never even made it out of harbour. So the Vasa sank in front of, you know, this would definitely be, you know, everyone with the smartphones if in like, it's like 1590 something, I think, she sank. Mary Rose. Have you guys heard of the Mary Rose in the UK? So the Swedish lifted Vasa, and again they've preserved her because she was under a lot of mud, so they've got a lot of stuff. The Brits did the same with the Mary Rose. Mary Rose had 60 cannon and was 20 years older than Mars. And the big difference there is that the Mary Rose had 60 cannon, and the ones that they found, they come from different places. Most of them have been stolen from castles. Mars, every single cannon on Mars was custom made for Mars. Eric XIV sent out an edict and sent soldiers to every church in Sweden, and they took all the bells. Every single church bell in Sweden was taken and melted down and turned into cannon for Mars. Which means that every single cannon has, and this is important, the Vasa coat of arms and Eric XIV stamped on it. And another little oddity, and this is the only ship that we found so far that had this, is the trunnion, the side piece on the cannon, so the kind of pivot where the cannon sits on the cradle. For every cannon on Mars, the trunnion is exactly the same as the bore of the barrel. So most cannons don't have this, they're kind of randomly different sizes. But on Mars, they did this. Now, me as the engineering head goes, well, I know why I'd do that, because then you can tell what cannonball goes into which cannon really easily. It's like you put it next to the trunnion, and if it's the same, then that's a cannonball for that cannon. Whether that's what they were thinking, I don't know, and I don't want to put that out as an archaeological theory. That's just my pet theory. So, before the battle, we've got this. We've got the Swedish fleet basically heading out and heading south, and the Danish Lubeck fleet, they've heard that this fleet was going out, so they're hunting. They're coming north and hunting. And May the 30th, 1564, they meet. And again, kind of naval battles, there would normally be a bit of toing and froing, a little bit of, you know, you'd fire a couple of shots just to let the enemy know you're there. It was a very gentlemanly affair. Mars went, you know, the admiral went, right, pick one, sink it. And so the first thing that happened on the battle was that Mars did a full broadside into one of the Danish ships, and down she went. So again, the first time in history that another ship had been intentionally sunk in battle, in this by cannon fire. Let's say, yeah, the Romans were definitely all into the smashing into each other thing. So rather than just trying to capture, they just blew the hell out of the long bark, Altabach, and sank her. And at which point the Danes went, what just happened? Yeah, it's like that was unheard of. And then for the rest of the day, basically, the Swedish did pretty well, because they're kind of coming south, the wind's coming in with them, you know, the wind behind their sails, they're doing a pretty good job of beating the hell out of the Danes. Unfortunately, on May the 31st, 1564, the wind changed direction and went east-west. And the Danish fleet now had the wind kind of behind them. And the problem with the Swedish fleet is, apart from Mars, most of them were fairly old ships. And they didn't have the rigging to be able to sail into the wind. So they were fine if the wind was behind them or to the side of them, but as soon as the wind came head on, they didn't have the manoeuvrability and the ability to really sail tight to the wind and come upwind, apart from Mars. So what we end up with is the Swedish fleet slowly getting blown back towards Sweden, and Mars here by herself in the middle. One of the things that's always struck me as really weird is they had really good records of the hit rate of the cannon. So somebody on that on each ship is taking note of the cannon fire and when they're hitting. So the Fortuna was like the Danish flagship. So the important thing here, it's like 199 shots or something, I think. These ones here, these 60, the 20 hits on deck level and the 40 hits below the waterline. This was new. Because again, Mars didn't care about trying to capture. It's just like, sink it, get rid of it. When we look at the hit rate on Mars, they're mostly on the upper decks or in the rigging. Yeah, there's still some in the lower decks, but and we still have the lower decks, so the damage done by them was very minimal. I think we've got one cannon hole actually in the hull. So obviously Fortuna was still trying to fight traditionally and disable Mars, and unfortunately succeeded. So Fortuna disabled Mars. The rigging basically was taken off. She was on fire, and they had to surrender. And so Fortuna came in. The Marines went across. At this point, the Swedish just like holding their hands up, going, "Okay, fair enough." The officers were all taken off Mars, and a boarding party was put onto Mars, because it was known that Mars had the war treasury. Mars was carrying the war treasury that was going to northern Germany to try and hire the army. And whilst the boarding party was on board Mars, but after the officers had come off, Mars exploded. Basically, our theory, based on what we found on the wreckage and the historic record, is that the forward magazine caught fire. And the forward magazine was basically around the forward mast, and that mast went 400 feet straight up, and the ship went straight down. We now know it blew the bow completely off, and we know that because we haven't found the bow yet. So the ship went down. She went down so fast that there was a massive cloud of steam. It was said that it was the ghost of the ship leaving the ship. Because obviously all these cannon that have been fighting and fighting and fighting for 2 days were absolutely red hot, hit the water, and it's the Baltic. Yeah, there's a reason why we say something is Baltic when we mean it's cold. It's cold in the Baltic, and in May the water temperature is probably around 42 Fahrenheit. So suddenly you get these absolutely red hot cannon hitting that water, massive steam cloud came up. And that was it. That was the end of Mars in 1564. And no one knew anything more about her. No one knew where she was or anything else. And about probably now 30 years ago, at the time, a young chap called Richard Lundgren, who's a very good friend of mine, he's a Swedish guy, he's living in Sweden. Him and his brother and his father, they were divers, they were hunting for wrecks. And he'd been to a museum as a small child and seen this map with a list of wrecks and or ships, like the major ships that had sunk in the Baltic. And he was looking at the list, and then he was looking at the map, and he was looking at the list, and he was looking at the map, and he's going, "There's 2 on that list that aren't on the map. Where are they?" And the answer was, "We don't know." And the 2 were wrecks called the Mars and the Sword. Both were actually found within a year of each other in 2011. And this started Richard's thought process. So over a lot of time, reading shipwreck books, obviously we all know that shipwrecks look exactly like this. Richard started with a small group of friends, and they went side scanning. They bought the side scan, they went out, and then they earned a bit of money doing other stuff with it, and then would upgrade the side scan, and all the money that they earned doing other commercial jobs just ended up going back into more kit trying to find Mars. Now in the 20 years, it wasn't completely barren. They found 169 other wrecks, but they never found Mars. And people kept saying to Richard, why do you keep doing it? Why do you keep hunting? You're never going to find it. And his answer was always, well, we might. Why wouldn't we keep hunting? If we don't keep hunting, we'll definitely not find it. If we hunt, we might find it. And then that was it, 2011. They managed to put a team together to go out for a final check. And the thing in 2011 is there's an odd weather thing going on, where the wind, rather than running kind of north-south up and down the Baltic like it normally does, during the phase that they were scanning, it was running east-west. And I don't know if you've ever tried doing any sonar scanning on a boat going across the wind, staring at a screen as the boats, and these are small boats that they're using, they're not using big ships to do this. This is actually a fake photo taken from one of the survey boats on one of the later projects rather than actually the finding light. You want to kind of go in and out of the wind because it's a bit more stable. So it's the first time they scanned east-west across this particular patch. And they saw that. Now, to me, that looks like an awful lot of something, and it doesn't look very natural. You see something like that on a side scan, you go, that's probably not natural. We probably need to go and have a look at that. So they did. Sent divers in, and they found this. And they were looking around, and so they're diving this. And in Sweden, there's laws about what you are and aren't allowed to dive on. And so they kept this very much under their hat for a little bit whilst they were trying to work out what it was. They were pretty sure at this point this was Mars, but they needed proof. So they're looking around and they found all of these big bronze cannons. And then they found a cannon that was the right way up with the House of Vasa shield on it. And that really narrowed it down because there wouldn't have been very many. And this is not the best photo of this because this is actually a bit of another Roman numeral. All of these cannons had numbers on them. But one of the things they found, and I haven't been able to get hold of a photo of it, I need to make sure that this year on the project we get a photo of it, is on one of the cannons they had the House of Vasa, then I think underneath it said XIII. Now, anyone who knows Roman numerals knows that XIII is nonsense. It doesn't fit the pattern. It should be XIV for 14. XIII. And so they took this note. They didn't take the picture, but they took note of this and went to see the leading authority in Sweden on cannon, a guy called Ingvar. And they said, got a question for you. If we found a cannon with XIII underneath the crest, what would that mean? And Ingvar went, well, if you found a cannon like that, it would only mean one thing. It would mean, there'd only ever been one ship that had cannon marked like that. But, that's never been found. It's like, what ship is that? Well, that's the Mars, but obviously no one's ever found the Mars. They're like, And the odd thing was, the same summer, there was another company run by a guy called Carl Douglas, MMT, the name of the company. They were scanning down the Baltic, looking for Mars. Because Carl had decided, right, we definitely need to find Mars. And Richard was decided they definitely... And Richard and the guys were looking at the AIS system and looking at how fast they were moving down the Baltic, MMT were. Now, MMT have like a, $500 million research ship with ROVs and submarines and all the latest technology. And the Mars guys were on a 1956 ex-German patrol boat with whatever they could duct tape together to make it work. So they're watching on the AIS and looking, and they did some calculations. And when MMT were 24 hours away from finding Mars, they booked a meeting with the government. So Richard and the guys turned up, and there's 4 or 5 politicians and some of the governmental archaeologists all in a room. And Richard walks in with some lawyers in tow and a document. And they said, we found something really, really exciting and important, and we will tell you what it is and where it is if you sign this document. And this document gives us the right to be the dive team involved in the archaeological research of this wreck. And the government, being the government, went, no, go away. They went, all right, we're not going to tell you what it is. Well, what did you find? Document first, then we tell you. And after an hour or so of toing and froing, they eventually signed the document, and it was all notarized by the lawyers that were brought in especially for the purpose. It's like, okay, we've signed you a bit of paper. What did you find? We found the Mars. And the whole room went silent. It's like, what do you mean you found the Mars? We found the Mars. And they pulled out the photos and showed that. And it's like, oh. At which point, obviously, politicians being politicians tried to backpedal. Couldn't, because it was very well dealt with by the lawyers. 2 hours later, there was a 1 nautical mile exclusion zone around the wreck. Now, the interesting thing in Sweden, to put a maritime exclusion zone into Swedish water requires an act of Parliament. It's not just a dude who goes, right, you can't go there. Parliament had to vote to allow that to happen. They managed to get a vote through Parliament, the Swedish Parliament, in 2 hours to protect this wreck, which kind of gives you an understanding of how important that wreck is to the history of Sweden. So, 2012, 2013, great big project involving multiple ships, submarines, all sorts of stuff. Our archaeological team, that's the divers in the background trying to stay out of the way of the press. And we get in and we find these, we're in doing this. And we get some lovely photos. Mars is 250 feet deep. The water temperature on the bottom, I looked this up this morning, is 39 Fahrenheit. And that's the warm bit, because it gets colder, it's 36 in the midwater zone. So as you can see, dry suits, we have electrical heating underneath them, we have rebreathers on so that we can stay down longer. The other thing is that the bottom of the Baltic is a completely non-oxygen environment. There is no oxygen in the water. There is no shipworm. There's no bacteria. There is nothing that eats the wood. There's nothing that corrodes anything. Well, iron goes black because there's no oxygen, but there is hydrogen sulfide in the water layer, which is part of a natural breakdown of organic matter. And so all of the iron has gone black. It doesn't go red or brown. It goes absolutely black. And even the bronze, so this is bronze, gets this black colouring on it because the sulfide is a bit corrosive. One of the reasons we use the rebreathers is because if we were doing normal open circuit diving, we'd be releasing bubbles into the water and we'd be oxygenating the water around the site. So the closed circuit rebreathers are a vital part of preserving the wreck as much as we can.
How do you get that, Jason?
Yeah, so it's a fair way down. We obviously do some measuring because we have to because the archaeologists like us to measure stuff. Hence why pretty much every photo of anyone on the Mars you see, they've normally got at least one of these shoved somewhere, so that when we find something we can measure it when we take a photo. And we've got measuring the cannonballs. I love this. So that's a cannon on its cradle, and these is lead sheeting. And there's two concepts behind what the lead sheeting might be. So for me, I call this the engineer's cabin because I think the lead sheeting is probably for trying to repair the ship. But there are other people who are suggesting actually at this time it was easier for them to take lead for making musket shot as sheets rather than as pre-made musket shot. So they'd have a certain amount of musket shot, but then if they needed more, they'd make it on the boat. I don't know, I've not tried making musket shot, so I don't know which. Or it could be multi-purpose. Yeah, that's the other thing. We don't really know. But we get this kind of stuff. The thing with diving Mars is you swim over her. I remember my first dive on her very obviously. You come down the shot line and you get to the side of the hull and you see cannon ports in front of you. You're like, wow. And you swim around for a bit and then you come up at the end of the dive. It's like, I thought there was supposed to be some cannon on this wreck. It's like, there are. I think we have 77 of the cannon actually still on the wreck itself. Well, I didn't see any cannon. It's like, well, next dive, look better. And the problem was, in my head, I was looking for a cannon that's probably about the size of this table. I wasn't looking for a cannon that's the size of the stage. So the round things that I saw, I just thought were bits of rigging and masts. But actually, it's cannon. And once you get your eye in, you realise that half of what you're looking at are cannon. It's not just the timber. And we're almost bored of the cannon by now. It's like we've lifted, we've lifted one, which they've done some metallurgy on and some research on. But most of the stuff here we're leaving in situ because lifting from this depth is super difficult, and the Swedish government are already paying an awful lot of money to try and conserve the Vasa. They really don't need another drain of resource, and especially since the environment that this is in is pretty much the perfect environment for protecting it, since it's been there 450 years already and not changed. The later projects, we have a slightly smaller boat. It's still nice. 700, estimated 700 men went down on Mars. 700. Again, the Baltic does not degrade remains, so we should see bones. This here is a femur, a human femur. It actually has an axe mark in it on the side. It is the only human bone we have found so far. I want to know where the other 1,399 femurs are.
Something in there to eat them or drag them?
The squishy bits will basically dissolve, but the bones don't. You know, that's it. There's another wreck in Sweden, and they call it the Seahorse wreck, where literally it's kind of upright on the bottom. She sank in a storm, and on the ship's wheel, you can see the ropes tied to the ship's wheel, and there's wrist bones still in the ropes, and the rest of the skeleton is literally sat on the deck below.
Wow.
Where the squishy bits have dissolved and the skeleton has just fallen down, but intact skeleton sat there, because obviously the helmsman was tied to the wheel during the storm to avoid him being washed overboard.
Wow.
Didn't help him when the ship sank. So that's one of the challenges: is where on earth are the crew? Yeah, they didn't take 700 men off. You know, they were still on board. They didn't float off. Yeah, that because again, the ships at this time would have had anti-boarding nets all over the decks and everything. So even if they were on the top deck, which they wouldn't have been, they wouldn't put all of the crew on the top deck. It wouldn't fit or anything else. They'd still be trapped by that layer of netting. And a lot of the netting is still intact. I mean, not as bits of netting, but we see a lot of that rope around. So where they are, we don't know. There is a kind of liquid organic silt at the bottom of the wreck, which I suspect if we were allowed to start removing, we might find more remains under there. But we're trying to persuade the archaeological team to allow us to do some small-scale excavations on this. So yeah, here we go. Here's that. There's another angle. We have cooking pots, so these little iron cooking pots and bronze cooking pots as well. A mug, actually a drinking container. Some silver coins. Now again, Mars was carrying a treasury. She was carrying the war treasury. So it was something like, there should be around about 1,000 gold coins and 8,000 silver coins. We found 6 silver coins so far. 3 of which were literally just lying on the top, on a bit of wood.
Have you actually penetrated the ship?
She is not entirely intact, but we have penetrated quite a lot of the areas that are big enough for a diver to get into, very carefully. But bearing in mind, 450-year-old ship that blew up, and at that depth, it's nerve-wracking going into or under her. But some of us do. We have an international team, so it's not. We have people from Sweden, from the UK, from the US. We have some guys from Korea who come over, a couple of Russians who come over, some Germans, some sort of Norwegians. Yeah, we have a big team who comes.
The Explorers Club?
So a number of us. I do. Richard does. We actually did an Explorers Club flag report on this in 2014.
Say you're at 250 feet.
Yep.
For the rebreather.
Yep.
So obviously you had to use some Trinex, no?
Yep.
Are there even tables for that? I mean, what's the deal with that?
There is the software out there will calculate the decompression for that.
That's really cutting edge right there.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest issue we have here is the cold, the effect of cold on decompression. So we're actually, compared to most people, very aggressive with the decompression for these dives, because it's actually a lot of the time better for us to just be back on the boat warming up rather than spending longer in the water, because as you cool down, the decompression becomes significantly less effective anyway.
Did you scrub without pure oxygen at the end and all that?
We boost the mixture in the rebreather at the end to quite high. Yeah.
Do you go in the chamber?
No, we don't have a chamber. It's
You don't have a chamber, period.
no, no. We've done. I said there's like
Water decompression.
all the decompression's done with water. There is a chamber that's an hour helicopter flight away if we needed to, but we don't have a chamber on site. We are literally in a tiny little fishing village, like the base is in a tiny little fishing village off the east coast of Sweden. But to date, we've not had any issues that required chamber treatment. So. And the divers that come onto the project are all very experienced at diving in this depth range or deeper. So most of us have an awareness of how we personally decompress, and it's very easy for us to adjust the decompression we do if things start feeling wrong, let's say. Our biggest issue is actually in the event of a dry suit failure, that if we get flooded with 36-degree water, whatever decompression we do is probably not going to be very effective. So we have procedures in place for that kind of situation. But again, touch wood, we've not had to use any of those. So then let's look at what we do next. Well, as already mentioned, the photogrammetry. This is kind of the limit of what someone could do with the Mars wreck in terms of sketching, and pretty certain that this actually got sketched off one of the photogrammetry models. We have multi-beam, and the multi-beam output's really cool. We actually use the multi-beam as quite a lot as the map for working out where we're going to go. But once you start zooming in on multi-beam, the resolution is maybe 5 to 10 centimeters on the multi-beam. We did have floor-mounted, like tripod-mounted multi-beam on it as well to try and get different angles, and the results were okay, but not amazing. Photo mosaic. This is a 600 photo mosaic. It took about 4 months for somebody to stitch together. It made the National Geographic cover in 26 countries. So that's kind of cool. And the great thing about photo mosaics is they are entirely not accurate. There is an almighty great big timber sticking out of the hull coming down here that doesn't even exist on this, and it's because it was probably on the overlap of a couple of photos, and whoever it was who was stitching it together just removed it because it was easier than trying to make it stitch. So whilst this is really pretty, it's not super accurate. But what you can see here, this looks like the ship's on her side. She's not, she's actually upright. So the hull is almost exactly upright, but the port side of the hull, which is what you can see here, has snapped at the halfway point and fallen over, and the starboard hull basically has split out like here. So if you swim under here, there's actually cannon pointing out of the gun port still. And you can see there, that's the end of the wreck. That's not an entire ship. We are missing about a third of her from there forwards, so from that main mast forwards is missing. We are still hunting for the bow.
Is it fragmented out, or?
We have debris going out 2 miles, and we have done a lot. I mean, we've ROV searched most of the big bits out to about a kilometre. Well, yeah, so 0.67 of a mile out. We've diver searched to 100 metres out. So we've done. That's actually what we're mostly doing at the moment, is working the debris field. And as I said, we've got multi-beam and ROV, and side scan further out. This year's project, we're probably going to be dropping some people on some of those further things. Then we get this photogrammetry stuff. So this is, all of these little blue squares are where the camera was when we took photos. Now at this point, I think you can see up here somewhere, no, you can't see a total. This bit of the model was made with 28,000 photos. So it's kind of like each of these things down here is a different dive, capturing photos for different bits, and we've stitched it all together. This model now goes out 50 metres in every direction, so another 150 feet in every direction, and we're at 110,000 photos. And we get this. So this is kind of from inside another bit of software for looking at it, and then we can do 3D reconstructions. So like this little diver here is entirely fake. We modelled him in 3D just to add some scale to it. So again, you can see, whereas on the multi-beam and stuff, it just looks like she's kind of lying on her side, you can actually see here that there's quite a lot of depth to her, and yeah, so the keel is actually kind of down here, pretty much upright, comes up and then snaps over. We can get inside most of this hull. So at the back here, the Admiral's cabin, that we call it, is an area. We actually found a pewter plate embedded in one of the oak timbers in what's now the roof. I mean, it would have been a wall. How a pewter plate manages to get enough speed to embed itself into oak, no idea, but that happened.
Explosion, if a mast went up 400 feet,
Well,
plate could go.
yeah. And then this is, yeah, and this is a little demo that we put together. Again, this is a few years old now. We've moved on quite a long way from this, but it just kind of gives you an idea of the. So there you can see where that diver is. The plate diver is lighting up the where the rudder would be bolted onto the keel. The stern post. You've got the main capstan up here. You've got all the gun ports on the side here. This area actually down here we call it the kitchen because these are fire bricks, and we found a load of cooking pots around there. Cannon all over this thing. Cat 2 cannon pointing out down there. There's another cannon there. There's another cannon there. Somewhere up here is an iron cannon sticking up right. The iron cannon are kind of interesting. They don't look anything like a cannon. They basically look like a wooden coffin because back then they couldn't really make the iron strong enough, so they'd make it in pieces and then it'd be roped together with wooden slats around it, so the wood kind of gave some of the protection. So the iron did the heat resistance, and then the wood kind of would allow it to bend. But I think the reason they only had 8 of them is they ran out of churches to rip the bells out of for the bronze ones. So
is the actual wreck site considerably different from what the historical record would have told you?
No, it's pretty similar. I mean, the historical record says she blew up and sank. And what we're finding is pretty much that she blew up and sank. What we're finding on board, in terms of the numbers of cannon and stuff, are pretty much what the record seems to indicate. The records are not very easy. It wasn't, this ship has this many of this and this many of that. We're having to kind of engineer it from various sources to try and work out what they called certain things. But yeah, it seems about right. As I said, apart from the fact that we've basically not found the war treasury yet. We have recovered a few bits. So we recovered 2 halves of a cannon. A lot of the cannon that we found have snapped in 2. Which is, I think, is purely down to a red hot bronze cannon being dumped into freezing cold water very quickly. So I think they're shearing at that point. It's also kind of a weak point just in front of where the trunnions are.
That's a full-size cannon right there?
This is a small one. This is probably only 10 feet long.
Oh my God.
Said on Mars, everything, the scale, you have to work to a different scale on Mars.
How did you raise them?
Carefully. Surface winched. So we'd and all of these bits weren't actually raised from the wreck, they were raised from the debris field because it was going to be too dangerous for us to try and lift a cannon out of the wreck. So we found they didn't actually plan on lifting the 2 halves of the same cannon. It just happened that the 2 bits that they lifted then actually fitted together. So lifted these are all in a pond being conserved at the moment. But what we did is, once we had them out, we scanned them. And we reconstructed it digitally. So literally we took the pieces, we scanned it, we glued them back together, reconstructed the whole carriage, and then gave it a digital paint. And we actually have about 3 of these 3D printed, not in full scale, but kind of about this size, again for the museum. And kind of an epilogue. Eric XIV, he only reigned 8 years. He was basically arrested by the dukes in Sweden who said, no, you're doing too much. Put in jail, and then it turns out the way that they tended to deal with royal prisoners that they kind of wanted rid of, they'd get poisoned. Basically poisoned with pea soup. It was a traditional way of getting rid of Swedish kings. So yeah, arsenic in the pea soup. Yes, his half brother and his uncle kind of got together and did this. So yeah, National Geographic done a load of stuff with us. The Explorers Club. We've got the VR game that I've got over there. is coming out some point this year, and it basically takes the 3D model that we made, and the games company have built this archaeological game around it. So it means that anyone can now dive to Mars. It is pretty cool. Yeah, various supporters, and then that is me. So, any questions? I'm happy to take questions. No, I either did a really good or a really bad job.
Oh, come on, I give you 2 days of questions already.
How long of taking pictures before it came out to video? You said it was
2.5 years.
2.5 years?
Yeah, 2.5 years of processing to get that 3D model out. Now, part of that was trying to work out how on earth to do that, because no one had ever done a model of that scale underwater. Still to this day, no one has done a model of that scale underwater. So everything that we did on that was try it, fail, try again, fail, try again. All that kind of worked. All right, let's follow that track for a bit and get it working.
On the show on Discovery Channel, that's
Drain the Oceans.
the Curse of Oak Island, and they got Curse of the Civil War Gold. They have the thing on the tripod with the laser that goes around.
Yeah, so that's LiDAR scanning. That works really, really nicely in good visibility.
And flat.
Yeah, we have at best about 6 feet of visibility most dives on that. So LiDAR doesn't work at all.
Sketchfab, is that is that the wing of your business to actually?
No, so Sketchfab is it's an awesome little website where you can upload 3D models. Okay. So it's just a 3D model display. The MarsProject.org is the Mars Project's own website. We haven't got much of the 3D stuff up on there at the moment because it's something that we're actually using. We've licensed it to a few TV companies occasionally. So.
What are they going to do in the future then? What's the plan? The whole.
Well, I don't know. It depends what we find.
Like you accomplish this, what's the next thing they want to do?
I said there's 1,399 more femurs to find, and hopefully 700 skulls. So. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's all right.
What John didn't mention is GUE, and he's going to give us a quick little 2-minute sketch.
So, has anyone here heard of GUE? Apart from you, couple. Okay, so GUE, we are kind of like a diver training agency, but actually we're not. We're more of an exploration and conservation agency who have diver training as part of our concept. And GUE's goal is to have projects like Mars going on all over the place and make sure that divers are capable of doing that kind of diving. So the training that we offer can take somebody to the level where they could go and dive Mars in the future.
Where is your training?
Worldwide. We're very small. I mean, headquarters is in High Springs, which is why I've been in High Springs.
Headquarters in High Springs?
Yeah, we have 3 staff. Like globally, as an agency, we have 3 staff. We have 180 instructors worldwide. So we're very, very small. We're quite expensive, I will say, but
the good stuff always is.
Exactly. Yeah. But the important thing is that the point of GUE and GUE's basis is doing projects like this, so that we're learning the stuff that we've put together to be able to dive like that is what we're teaching. So the whole point is trying to get divers as good as they can be as early as they can be.